Thank you so much for joining us on preference provisions of bankruptcy and how to keep your AR safe. I'm Kathy Quill. I'll be your moderator today. On today's session, we have the expert, Scott Blakely. He's a partner in Blakely LLP. I have known Scott for most of my, I'm not aging him, I'm aging myself, most of my professional career. And I'm telling you, before we even get started, he is my go-to guy. So we are super lucky to have him here and to have him available to you, both for this webinar and to answer your questions. So let's go ahead and get started.
Kathy, thank you for the introduction. And for so many credit team members, it's quite a frustrating topic of the idea of whether it's a customer that is filed under the federal U.S. Bankruptcy Code, or instead have elected to liquidate their assets through state law. But in both settings, it is a painful process where the credit team, perhaps through collectors, has done everything within their power to be consistent with their credit and collections policy to get paid, most often with a problem account, only to find perhaps years later that a bankruptcy trustee demands the payments received within the 90 days of that customer either filing bankruptcy or liquidating their assets. And one of our topics is one that we as our company received a preference demand for all payments we received within the 90 days prior to the bankruptcy filing. Did we do something illegal or wrong? Because part of our
we have the poll question up, so please answer.
Because the topic in terms of our reporting responsibilities to our management and our sales team, especially if it's a high dollar preference demand or lawsuit, and especially if our sales team or management has not been through this process, can be just that. Did our credit team do something wrong? Did our sales, did our management overall, is this a punitive provision to try and correct the course, so to speak, of suppliers that perhaps has taken advantage of a supplier? And again, have they broken a state or federal law? And the takeaway for us in response to that poll question is the good news is we haven't. Unfortunately, what our U.S. Congress in crafting the bankruptcy preference laws has attempted to do is try and treat consistently all suppliers during the customer's backslide into insolvency. Now, of course, that backslide into insolvency that the Congress pegged as 90 days prior to the bankruptcy, is commonly undisclosed to the supply chain, especially for our small and mid-sized customers that file bankruptcy. Commonly, they're not sharing financial information. And part of the reason for that is they're simply not in a position to share key financial information to the supply chain out of concern that suppliers will pull back on credit terms. But again, notwithstanding suppliers not knowing that the customer is insolvent, payments that are received during this 90-day look back prior to the bankruptcy filing can still find the payments recaptured. And again, it doesn't require invoices being disputed. It doesn't require an intention by the customer to give special treatment to the supplier. Rather, instead, what we have under this law is strict liability, which means that supplier, if you receive payments within the 90 days prior to the bankruptcy, it is a preference. Now, we'll work through the defenses that may allow us to keep some or all of the payments received during the 90 days. But again, circling back to explaining to our management why it is that we've received this preference demand or a preference lawsuit is our U.S. Congress, and again, the state legislators that have enacted state law preference actions for those customers liquidating their assets in those settings. It is the purpose is to try and treat consistently all suppliers. So if it happens to be that you receive payment on account of invoices that are paid within the 90 days, and let's say a competitor of yours that also supplied had open invoices but was not paid, the notion is to try and treat equally your payment and then the recapture of that under the preference laws for the other supplier that did not. So that's some of the background in terms of perhaps the shock for those of us, or again, our management and sales that don't appreciate what the kind of the backstory here is of whether the supplier has done something wrong to deserve this treatment. So let's consider another poll question. And these are kind of a common fact pattern. Again, whether it's an instance of whether we know this customer is insolvent or otherwise, and we certainly saw this during the pandemic, again, no fault of our customer, but they've fallen past due. We place the customer on credit hold, again, with the support of our sales team and management, out of concern that the pending POs, if we do release them on terms, perhaps they may not get paid. And then the customer does pay on those COD shipments, but it happens to be, again, within this 90-day reach back because the customer's filed bankruptcy. In terms of that preference demand that we receive on account of COD payments, are we required to disgorge those payments to the bankruptcy trustee or the party advancing the preference suit? And the good news for us in this poll question, as we're going to tabulate the results, is that is a defense for us. It's a bright line defense that allows suppliers to keep those payments. Now, having said that, it still may be our job as a credit team member to educate the trustee or the party making the preference demand or advancing the preference lawsuit that all of these payments were made on the COD basis. And again, in the best of worlds, the invoices reflect that movement from a credit term relationship to COD. But as our poll question underscores, we don't have to give that payment back. But again, part of what our takeaway today is what our job as credit team members are in dealing with the preference action. And we'll talk in a few minutes in terms of building the preference defenses. And although there is a responsibility of our trustees that are advancing these preference suits, or again, the party that is assigned the powers to pursue these preference actions, ultimately it falls on our shoulders as credit team members to underscore what our defenses are. And as we've seen with this poll result, we appreciate that, upwards of 75% of responses underscore that we do have that defense. And again, we're going to talk about how we respond to whether it's a preference demand or a preference lawsuit. But again, part of our job is to evaluate that 90-day look back and figure out what was this a terms relationship? Was it COD? Because we recognize this customer as one